Welcome to Living Free in Tennessee, where we talk about building the life you choose on your terms. Today is Monday, May 27th, 2024, and this is episode 906 of Living Free in Tennessee. And if you are joining me today live because you're home from work and you don't usually get to see a live, great. I'm glad to have you here. It is Memorial Day, and I don't usually do a Memorial Day show because I usually take Memorial Day to do Memorial Day things. But I realized that we have not celebrated the birthday of Living Free in Tennessee, which was May 20th. That was our 8th year of being a podcast. And usually what happens is my ADHD brain kind of goes off on its own thing, and I become aware I missed my birthday again for the podcast. And I realized it was happening this time. So it was definitely a good time to do this show. And I've been out a lot the last couple of weeks. As y'all know, I got sick and I didn't do shows. So I thought, well, we'll do one today because I'm feeling okay. I've got my herbal tea here. And we're going to celebrate 8 years of living free in Tennessee with a look back at where we started and why we focus on homesteading, coffee, and why the community is so important to how this podcast has developed. So, something you may be interested in checking out if you are a newer podcast listener is the first episode. The first episode aired on May 20th of 2016, and the podcast has changed quite a bit. Thank you, Hogs14, for the happy birthday. It's changed quite a bit, but I haven't listened to that episode since 2016, about a week after I put it out. And I realized that our core mission at LFTN has not changed one bit after I didn't listen to the whole episode, but I did kick it off. And if you're interested, I've put a link to the direct download for that episode in the show notes. Of course, if you listen to Living Free in Tennessee on your podcast player, you can go scroll way back and the episode might be there or it might not. It's just, it's if you find it and what the settings you have. Before we jump into today's show, though, I want to talk about our featured event of today's show, and that is the Homesteading Boot Camp at Fable Haven Trade School. It is coming up on June 14 through 16 at a location sort of close to Cleveland, Tennessee, sort of close to Chattanooga, Tennessee. It is in a town called Old Fort, Tennessee. And they have a beautiful 200 plus acre piece of land that they acquired a year ago and started transforming it into not only something that's like a homestead, but a trade school. Amani and River teach people how to build homes with hempcrete. And so they have a model home there. They have workshops. They are growing food. They just got some livestock in. And they are turning into a hub in East Tennessee for learning heritage skills, which is pretty darn cool. If you want to check that out, I think the cost for the course or for the boot camp is $250, June 14 through 16. Food is $100 extra. And if you want to stay in one of their yurts or one of their glamping locations, they have some cabins, I think. That costs a little bit extra too. So it just depends on what you want to do. And I'm pretty sure you can rustic camp there, but I didn't ask that question. I actually did a live stream with these guys yesterday, just talking about their whole project, what homesteading means, like 5 things I would say to homesteaders if I was starting homesteading and knew then what I know now, which was a fun conversation while we had all the weather just like flowing over our head yesterday. It was crazy yesterday here. We lost a rather large branch from our chestnut tree. And I think we probably should get the chainsaw out eventually and clear that out. But that was pretty much the only damage we had here. But we got a lot, like we got so much rain that I currently have a 10-inch pipe going up out of my ceiling in the kitchen where the hood is going to go over my stove, the vent hood. And it has leaked a little bit since it went in and we haven't caulked it yet. The bowl, I had put a bowl under that just in case, because it doesn't always leak. It's just when there's wind and rain and it's just right. I heard the bowl crash to the floor in the middle of the night and water went everywhere. And it was like, okay, I get to mop my kitchen in the middle of the night because I didn't get on the roof and seal it, and neither did Tactical. So that is what it is. Anyway, that's the featured event of today's show. Check it out at havenearthtradeschool.net. /homestead bootcamp haven village. That's the way to get directly to the product. And if you can't remember that, you can just go to havenotradeschool.net and send Imani just an email asking about it. Or if you go to the show notes, which will be at livingfreeintennessee.com about an hour after the live is done being recorded, that link is directly in the show notes. So you can go straight there. I noticed that from their like classes that we have page, the link doesn't work to get you straight to buy that course. So I will reach out to Imani after that and see if that's intentional. It could be intentional. They may want you to become a member like by signing a thing before you get access to their classes, because they're operating on a membership model, as I understand it. But also, if you want to see the live yesterday, I'm throwing that in the show notes too. I have 2 sponsors today. The first one I wasn't going to do today, but then we had so much lightning yesterday that here's the deal. EMPshield.com sells a device that you can put to protect your home from electrical surges and EMP surges. And I won one at the Midwest Preparedness Project 2 weeks ago, and I can't wait till it arrives. But like ever since that event, it's been like wave after wave of lightning storm. And I'm like, ugh, like it's going to be just my luck that I'm putting an EMP in, right? An EMP shield in, which protects you from lightning surges. And I'm going to get hit by lightning like the day before the stupid thing arrives, because of course it's being mailed to me right now. They are the only product on the market that I know of that has an insurance policy that if their device fails to protect you in a situation where a lightning strikes your house or it strikes the transformer on the pull outside your house, they go up to, I think it's $20,000 or $25,000 warranty to replace appliances that get fried. And they have a wall of fame in their factory full of EMPs, that EMP shield devices that in fact protected homes. And then what happens is they become non-operational after that and you need to replace it. But I would much rather spend, $350 on a device than all of my appliances in my house. And people wonder, like, how often does that happen, Nicole? Well, it's happened twice on my street since I moved here that a transformer was hit and people's TVs, refrigerators, laundry machines, computers, like everything got fried in their house by that lightning strike. So I've always wanted to have one in, and I meant to install one 6 months ago and just never got around to ordering it. By the way, if you go to EMPshield.com and use the coupon code LFTN for Living Free in Tennessee, you get $50 off any device. And they make them for cars, they make them for solar arrays, they make them for houses, campers, like anything. It's pretty cool. EMPshield.com. Our other sponsor of today's show is great because I've just fired up my freeze dryer again, discountmylarbags.com. Toby over at discountmylarbags.com reached out to me early on in this podcast about sponsorship, and I wasn't offering sponsors. And then he said, well, hey, send me your coffee bags from Holler Roast, and I'll analyze them and see if I can source them at a better price. He specializes in sourcing things at volume and then passing on those discounts to all of us. Check out what they have at discountmylarbags.com. And if you are a member of LFTN, there's a coupon code that gives you a little discount there as well. Okay, with that, I want to talk about our live stream schedule this week. I am playing around with TikTok, guys. Like, I'm on the TikTok live right now. I have my phone streaming us to TikTok. I can't pay attention to it and the screen here and like answer all of the questions that come in. But I just finally got approved for live streaming on TikTok over the weekend. And so I did a live stream of a Garden 30. I did a live of scraping the camper roof because we're in the middle of redoing the camper roof. And today I thought, well, we'll just run the phone while I'm streaming to y'all just for fun, because then it gives me an excuse to actually figure out how to integrate it with StreamYard. But we're going to be streaming on YouTube this week. Spicy Sisters are back. Amy Dingman took some time off. She reached out to me about, 6 weeks ago and said, hey, we should do another one of those. And I'm like, yeah, we should, right after all of my speaking engagements. And so we scheduled it for this week, Wednesday at 2 p.m. Spicy Sisters are back, and you'll see some videos about that. Tomorrow, I'm talking to Joel Riles from Fortress K9 at 12:30 p.m. and John Willis on our Tuesday live show. And we're going to hear all about his sudden move from Florida to Ohio, how he got that all done in 4 weeks, including selling a house. the adventures they hit along the way, and what he has learned in making the impossible possible. It's going to be a great show. And then, of course, we'll have our Friday Live as usual. Before we jump into the main topic of today's show, I have a segment for you, and that is Tales from the Prepper Pantry. This is where we talk about storing what you use and using what you store. I was a homesteader for, a decade, about a decade before I realized I was also a prepper, because when you move to the country, it's a long drive to the store. And so what I learned was, like, by growing food, preserving the food, eating seasonally, I didn't need to go to the store much. I got it down to going to the store once a month. And mostly the thing I didn't have covered was the dairy products. But, like cream for my coffee, except for this is herbal tea. But what seemed like a natural progression to me seems weird to other people. However, it's really nice to have a pantry to pull from when there are shortages at the store, when you have weather come through and you're flooded in and can't get out, when the snow makes all the electricity turn off and you can't buy stuff at the store because their POS is not up. Like, all of those, there's lots of things that happen that make it so you may not be able to immediately get the thing that you think you need. And if you are a just-in-time consumer, the just-in-time fulfillment system is great at keeping costs low, and it's great at moving stuff all over the world. It is not great at being resilient if any tiny thing goes wrong, because it's just in time. And you see that every time we have a natural disaster. So I think having things that you actually use in your pantry is very important. And the best way to get started with that is to document what you have. But over time, you get better and better at it. And here's what's up in my pantry this week. I've got my Harvest Right freeze dryer back up and running, and it was with the help of AJ. It actually was not broken. It needed an oil change pretty badly because I hadn't used it for about 6 months, and it had given me an error code because I dried something for way too long. So what I did was deep clean it, change the oil, start it, run a load of bread, because bread takes like 8 hours to freeze dry. Also, there's no good use for freeze-dried bread, but it's a really good test run and did not replicate the error code. So now it's back up and running, and it's sort of into my cycle of food preservation, just in time for the food to be coming off of the land, right? So, earlier in the year, I was using all of my stores, and now I'm refilling them, because that's sort of the cycle of the pantry on a homestead. Hello, Pack Rat. Thank you for the congratulations. So what I've got going on right now is Eggapalooza. That means I had a tower of eggs stacked up to my ceiling on top of my fridge, and I'm freeze drying those so that I can use them in the future. And I really like freeze dried eggs because they store at room temperature. And if you reconstitute them right, which takes a little bit of practice, they're pretty close to what scrambled eggs taste like if you're just going to cook them. And in fact, when we went through our last time of egg shortage, which I should have replaced my ducks sooner, I did not replace my ducks sooner, and my ducks got old. And we just went through months of no eggs with the ducks. And they started laying again last year, and then we incubated the ducks, and then we got ducks, and then we had to raise the ducks. And now I have all the ducks laying all the eggs. And during that time, the way we still had eggs that were not store eggs was by tapping into my freeze-dried stuff. By the way, if you decide to check out Harvest Right, I do have an affiliate link in the show notes. Use it. It's free to you, and it gives us a little boost every time somebody grabs their freeze dryer with that link. So I love it as a preservation tool. Somebody posed the question the other day, like, would you get a dehydrator or a freeze dryer? And my answer is, it depends on what your goal is and which one better fits what you need. A freeze dryer is much more expensive. So if you're not really going to use it much, don't buy one. Go rent access to somebody's for the couple of things you want to do. But if you think you're going to use it as, like, we produce most of our food from the land or from farms right by us, right? So we have to preserve it all year long. And so for me, it totally makes financial sense to have this tool. But if you're just going to, like, here's-y, onesie, twosie, then you can rent access to one. Anyway, that's just my thought on that. And dehydrated is totally different than freeze-dried, just from a usage standpoint. So different things freeze-dry better than things that dehydrate. I actually don't usually freeze dry my tea stuff. I room air dry it, and like my rose petals and stuff that I put in tea for the winter. I'm not sure what would happen if I freeze dried them. I mean, it would work, but it would be kind of like the steeping process would be different. So I may do a test on that. I do freeze dry my herbs though, because they become very dry. And then when I put them in the whatever I'm cooking, they absorb in very quickly. And so you have less of a I have to slow cook this to get the herbs to fully infuse thing. They infuse faster, which is kind of cool. I'm also designing the last piece of my house, which will be I wanted to have another bedroom over on that side so that if my mom ever moves in with mobility issues as she ages, it's all one level and she has her own space and I can keep the studio because the studio would become her bedroom if she moved in. I have a 2-bedroom house. And what I decided, hey, Tag, all is well. Hope you're doing well up there in Kansas. I was talking about EMP Shield a little earlier. Tag's involved with that company. But I decided to do this room a little differently and look at the big picture, like me-centered goals. And then if for some reason mom decides to stay here for a time, we'll figure out where she goes because there is plenty of space now. There can be more space later. And at the same time, I know that like functionally, I want better pantry storage set up. Because right now it's like I store things in a few places and it's not all integrated. And with some redesign, I can make it integrated and I can make it more just sort of weather resistant, so to speak. Like in the summer, it gets pretty hot in the prepper pantry. So I don't ever put canned goods in there because they'd be too hot. So they're tucked all over my house in different canned goods storage places that I've made, which works. But wouldn't it be nice to just have the one place where I rotate my cans? Like people who are capable of having basements just put them in their basement and they can load from the back of the shelf and take from the front of the shelf. And it's like amazing. We don't have that. I don't have it. I live in a basement. Like my house is basically a basement. So I'm really looking at like what kind of storage makes sense for a homestead this size. And then I know I want an endless pool or a swim spa sort of thing for exercise. And I have an outdoor kitchen and I will always have an outdoor kitchen. Even if I don't have an outdoor kitchen, I will do things outside because it gets up to, triple digits here or upper 90s in high humidity. And when what you're doing is canning food, you're boiling it in water. And then that just raises the humidity level in your home. And then your home gets hot. So I have done most of my summer sorts of big cooking things like on the Blackstone and canning outside for years. Last year, I actually did more inside than usual, but it's just so much nicer to be able to cook outside and have all that heat go outside, stay outside. I never have to cool my house because I heated stuff up in the house. That works from an energy efficiency standpoint too. It's like the same reason I grow vining tomatoes up the south facing side of my house, right? Keeps the sun from hitting my house. The sun doesn't heat that wall. It hits the plants turn into food. And then my house stays cooler as a result of that. So that's all happening. I'm designing it so that I can take some steps towards that swim spa faster than I expected to, because I am finding that the time investment to drive to swim laps places, it's like a 3-hour investment of time, which is I'm worth it. But I also think that I can wait another 10 years hemming and hawing over getting a way to swim at home and finally do it, and I will be less in shape than I am now. And my health is more important to me than that. So as I was looking at my overall strategic plan for my life, health is top of the list, right, John Palmer? And that means I have to invest in my health. And so what I'm thinking is if I know how it's going to go, I think I can slide that swim spa into the space it will be and eventually build around it, or never build. I may never build that thing onto my house. I may just make the current prepper pantry way more watertight and way more weather tight and call it good and have a swim spa outside that, can be winterized or whatever. So that's sort of what and that's related to the pantry because it's all about the pantry storage, right? We had a great discussion over on the Living Free in Tennessee Telegram group about ground beef. I went on there and I cooked ground beef. And at issue is that I have about 8 pounds of ground beef in one package that is defrosting in my fridge for the week. And I'm really good. I'm like hamburgers, meatloaf, tacos, Korean beef, like all of these things you can make with it. And I just thought, well, if I throw it out to the community, maybe they'll come up with some other ways. I like all of those things that I've listed. I just thought, like, what if I try something new? And then Leos mentioned moussaka, which I think I'm going to try this week, which means I have to acquire an eggplant. I am not going to add any wheat-based things to it, though. So I'm going to go more of a keto style, but I thought it would be fun, just a different blend of flavors, just to play around and have, because if you're not having fun with the food you cook from your homestead, like, why are you even homesteading? That's what I want to know. It is time to finish curing the pork that we got from Self-Reliance Festival so that we can serve the bacon at the next Self-Reliance Festival in October. I'm having a throat thing today, guys. It's not very pleasant. So it's been going on for months. This is not great. So anyway, it's time to cure that. I just, like, after Self-Reliance Festival, knowing that I had all these other like places to go and speak, I just didn't want to risk ruining it. So our chicken processing class is in 2 weeks on June 8th. And I use my outdoor fridges for that. And then the freezer I have one that's a convertible fridge freezer. I plunge it into deep freeze mode, freeze whatever birds we have left over from the class. And then once that's done, I can actually cure the bacon in a refrigerated place that is not going to be accessed for anything but the cured bacon. So I am waiting for that moment, and then we're going to go into curing the bacon. I'm going to look at what all is in there, and then they told me to reach out to them and just ask if there was anything, because I didn't take the class, right? So there's some stuff in there that may have some different handling. I don't think it's all bacon that is in my freezer right now. So we'll see. I have no idea what I'm curing, but I love curing meat. So that should be a fun adventure. And that brings me to a thought on homesteading. We are fearless, right? In order to homestead, you have to be fearless. Like, be willing to take that piece of meat that somebody hands you and cure, and you don't know how to cure it, and just give it a go. Like, what's the worst that can happen? It just doesn't turn out. Usually when something like that doesn't turn out, it turns out to be something good, just not the thing you were going for. And worst case scenario is you ruin that one little project and you learn something. That's just my thought on it. Garden's finally coming together. I'll be back up out there I'm doing one garden project a day right now as I catch up from the busy season. And I did a big day yesterday in between two storms where it was nice and overcast, so it wasn't hot. So I was pulling out all like just really weedscaping yesterday, and we'll do more of that. I think that's probably more of what I'm doing today, although there's a new squash bed I want to set up, and it is time to put the squash in the ground. So there is that. Next segment is Operation Independence. This is one of the original segments of Living Free in Tennessee. And I was also really surprised when I sort of listened back to that first episode to hear Operation Independence mentioned as like a foundational part of this podcast. I'm thinking, like, maybe I should talk more about what Operation Independence is in the future, like on a future episode, because I realized when I started this podcast in 2016, I had not broken out of the poverty mindset, but I needed to. Like, I knew I was aware. I'm not even sure I have now, right? I still find myself saying things. I'm like, did you just like say that to yourself? Like, what kind of a person are you? Like, you need to be better to yourself, Nicole, and you need to have more like confidence, right? But I also was in a situation where I had debt to pay off still. And knowing that, I realized that every time I don't pay somebody to do something for me, I retain not only the money I would pay them, but the money I had to earn and would pay taxes on to pay them. So like $100 bill for an electrical fix would turn into $130 or $140 I had to earn to pay them, so that then they could pay taxes on it and only put like $70 in their pocket. And then they'd use it and pay somebody else. And I was just really hyper aware of how money by moving reduces in value very quickly for all of us if we participate in that system, right? And so I developed Operation Independence as a game at home, where if I didn't use the dryer for my clothes and I hung them up, I got to put $2 in my independence fund. And if I didn't pay the electrician to change out the breaker, I got to put that time, I think I put $400 in the independence fund. It was like a big bill. If every time I made a decision that worked with my life that then resulted in less money going out the door, it was like this, it was a contest about who could put more money in their independence fund without, working themselves into the grave. And I called that the independence fund because every time I did that, it was one step closer to paying off the debt, to being independent of the system, which I was stuck in. And I felt like it was hard to get out of. Because I did that, I am out of debt. Like I have, what do I have? I have $5,500 left on my house right now. And I could pay it off right now. And I'm still deciding. We'll just put it that way. There's a point where inflation is higher than the interest rate on the money I own on my house at this time. So I've sort of just been letting it go and putting that money into other infrastructure here. But it's probably going to happen this year that I pay off the house. And I'm not sure I ever thought that was possible when I bought the house. And I didn't even spend that much on this house. That's the funny part. Like when people hear what I spent on my house, yeah, it's they're shocked that you could even get a house for that amount. We'll just put it that way. So this week, though, what I've done is I have been rapidly reducing the number of things I do for work or to earn money, because my word of the year is hone. And we're assessing the homestead in terms of what brings value now more than ever we have before. We are like making hard decisions to stop doing things that aren't serving us in some way. And with the extra time of doing fewer things, my home is back as a functional home now. I would say as of about 2 weeks ago, because what's been the struggle in the last really 12 months has been that my home is my source of rejuvenation and it empowers me to do well. And it was not empowering me. It was partially because it was ripped up, being completely redone, right? With the floor joists being redone and all of that. And it was not serving me and I couldn't find anything. And there's a little bit of that still going on, but now there are systems in place that are working and there's the right space made for the things that are important here. And you can walk in and you're not like climbing over boxes I need to unpack and all of that. And I had no idea. I mean, I knew it was going to make a big difference to get the house to this point. I had no idea how much of a difference it was going to make, though. And it's made a huge difference in the last few weeks. But of course, when you reduce how much you're selling things that you do, the income drops. That's just literally what has happened. And so now with that extra time, I'm thinking about how can I, with the time I have on the fewer things, push those up to do more, to result in more value coming in, right? And I say value on purpose because money is part of that, but there are other ways that we acquire value at the homestead, and it's more for me about the big picture of value. And at the end of the day, the electric bill is the electric bill, and you pay the electric bill if you have one tag. You pay the electric bill with money, right? But the value that comes from relationships or from trading with neighbors or any of those other things are also very important to me. So I am looking at it in overall value, because what I've found is the longer I homestead, the less actual money I need every month to quote unquote survive, right? It just doesn't, like, garlic does not cost me money. It does not. $0. It just goes in the ground. I harvest it, I cure it, I use it, and I put some of it back in the ground. And then the next year we do that cycle again. And that doesn't cost me anything. Yeah. Tag's like, what's an electric bill? He's completely off grid. I am not completely off grid. I am more off grid than I was 17 years ago when I moved on to this homestead, but one step at a time, one step at a time. I had fun testing my camper at Midwest Preparedness Project to see how much electricity it uses if I don't have it plugged into anything. And the answer is it uses 7% of the battery. And it uses another 20% of the battery to maintain the battery in the form of the I just forgot the word for it. The thing that lets it talk to my electrical system. Somebody's going to just say the word in the comments, guys, and I'll come out with it and I'll say it and I'll be like, yes, I already knew that. It's not, see, the word transformers in my head from the lightning strike. So I'm not thinking about what this other thing is, but everybody who knows anything about solar knows what it is. So the lesson in this for me is that the most important thing about building the life you choose on your terms, which is our tagline, is to really establish what's important to you and go for that. And don't just push because everything's important or earning money is the most important thing or whatever it is, and just do more. Because that charge controller, that's right. Thank you, Crystal. Because that will not serve you. Ultimately, you end up back in a place you don't want to be, having opted out of the system that you didn't want to participate in. If all you do is push for all the things, push for the things that matter, and be okay with the things that matter, right? Be okay with the things that matter to you that may not matter to other people. It's you, it's your life. You get to live your life. You only get one, unless you believe in reincarnation, but we're not going to go down that road right now, right? So, like, are you going to spend it living for other people's dreams, or are you going to spend it living your dream? That's the question you have to ask yourself. So, we're now ready for the main topic of today's show, which is really why homesteading and coffee. And this is all just an excuse to celebrate 8 years of living free in Tennessee. And before we start, I'm going to try something here, which requires me to move my pot of tea and turn my microphone around. I'm going to play for you the very beginning of the very first episode of Living Free in Tennessee. Okay. I'm assuming that audio got really quiet for y'all on the stream. So, oh, you didn't hear that at all. Okay. Well, I guess you're going to have to go to the link to hear that. I could hear it, but that's interesting. So, my mic didn't pick that up. Well, that'll just be a tech fail for me. So there's a big gap in the middle of the audio, in the middle of my audio podcast I have to do. So what I basically said was, what we're gonna talk about on that first episode was what we're eating this week, something we talk about all the time. The Independence Fund, which I just talked to you about a little while ago, and a daily planner that I've come up with. And I said that the reason I started the podcast was because people keep asking me how I get it all done. And the answer is I don't. I just have to prioritize things. So I listened to that excerpt and I'm like, that literally could have been the beginning of any show that I do, would be that one. So that's a blast from the past. If you want to hear old me actually say the words, the links are in the show notes at livingfreeintennessee.com. So, you know what to do if you want to actually hear the episode. And I'll figure out a better way to get audio playing. I guess I needed to make it into a video, put the video in StreamYard, play that video, and mute my mic. So that's what I'll do next time. I just thought I could put my mic up to the speaker and it would work, but it did not work. So there we go. So 9 years ago, we started on an adventure in the country. That is the first line of that first show. So I've now been here gosh, almost 18 years, 17 years. So when I started the podcast, I'd only been here 9. And the rest of what I had to say is what began as a weekend getaway quickly changed into a small homestead with chickens, gardens, laughter, neighbors, and sometimes the opposite of laughter. And I think we've shared those stories with you over the last 8 years, plenty of times. And the Holler Homestead is known in our area for our home roasted coffee. That became a full-time commercial business. And then I said in parentheses, it takes less time to roast coffee than to drive to the store to buy coffee, because I was already like militant about going to the store. Elephant garlic, stone ground flour, and hand rolled oats. So I've gone keto since then and don't eat any of that. We also help people learn how to preserve food and are keenly interested in self-sufficient living. So y'all, I've not listened to this episode once since about a week after I originally recorded it. And I listened to it back then to listen to like weird verbal tics I do, like the word like or like the word so I could be a better podcaster. And when I look at my world here at the Holler Homestead and I look at the podcast, it is, I feel like so much has changed since 2016, right? So much has changed, and it has in a lot of ways. But at the core, the mission, the motivation, it's still the same as it was on day 1 of this podcast. And do you know how good that makes me feel? A little surprised, if I'm honest, but it makes me feel really good that we've stuck to that mission for 8 years. Back in 2016, this podcast was really my only like creative outlet. I hadn't figured out how to even record a stupid video on my phone in 2016 that I could put up on a TikTok or a YouTube, right? I didn't know how to stream over the internet. I had this one recording mic from Recording Rock and Roll, and I had to figure out how to make it talk to my computer. And so I like the first few episodes, I was just recording on my computer mic because that's all I could do. And then I discovered the Scarlett Solo box, made that happen, and then it was like off to the races, right? But it was my only creative outlet because I had built a nonprofit organization that I ran, and therefore I was the administrator. And I don't like administrating. The podcast was an attempt to reach more people who were interested in not only homesteading, but in taking whatever steps they needed to take in their life so that they could build something for themselves, that they could build something outside the system to live as they saw fit without buying into societal expectations and without asking permission. It's why every time one of these like, what do I have to do to make, to check this box or this rule to start this thing? I'm like, I mean, can you sell one first? Like sell one, then figure out if you need to permit it. I understand that doctors and nurses and massage therapists have a permitting process they must go through or they're going to get in big trouble. But like selling your bar of soap that you made, getting a business license to sell this like $8 block of delicious soap that's made from Porterhouse and Teal. Until you start selling a bunch of them, it just doesn't matter. And you're fooling yourself into not starting when you worry about that, because when you have the sales, you'll figure it out. It's maybe that's a Gen X thing, when you have the sales, you figure it out, right? But I started meeting person after person after person who was interested in doing the same thing I was doing. Some of them like not homesteading per se, but homestead mindset in the city, right? But really what they wanted to do was build the life they choose. They wanted to live as they saw fit and not have to feel like they had to live this other way that they were told was the only way to live. Over the last couple of days, I've been really enjoying the Gen X stuff on TikTok. It's been sort of this thing going on over on TikTok for a couple weeks where somebody said Gen X is the worst generation and she had pink hair. And some Gen Xers on TikTok were like, well, let's just see how many Gen Xers are on TikTok. And they started following each other and interacting with each other and sharing experiences from being raised, between like 1965 and 1980 or being born in that time. And then we were raised in the late 70s, 80s, and 90s. And it's been hilarious because there's some stuff that like I remember it, but I didn't ever think about it. And now I really remember it because somebody said. I started watching The Day After, which was a TV series this week, and it was terrifying then, and it's still kind of terrifying. Just FYI, if you're gonna go watch that, be ready to be terrified. But what I noticed as I just got to thinking as I'm watching all these Gen Xers come out is they have a FIFO approach to life. And if you don't like the F-bomb, you need to forward about 30 seconds because what FIFO stands for is fuck around and find out. And that approach to life isn't just about, hey, if you mess with me, I'm going to mess you up or I'm going to get you or whatever. It's more like you see a rattlesnake and I'll say FIFO to you because you're like, well, do you think it'll bite me if I hit it with the stick? Well, I'll say FIFO, and then you do find out. And what happens is you get a natural repercussion from the rattlesnake if you mess with it. But so that's like the negative side of FIFO. The positive side of FIFO is that because what we had was Encyclopedia Britannica and the library and other people to ask who weren't necessarily there, when we wanted to learn something or do something, Gen X had to go try and then fail and then learn from the fail and then try again until we did the thing we tried to do, which has led to a certain fearlessness. Like I can't tell you how many developing electronic devices I pulled apart because it wasn't working and I was like, well, it's broken, I might as well pull it apart. Some of them I fixed, some of them were then ruined forever. But nobody died when they were pulling apart their Walkman or whatever, right? It's like you figured it out. The transistor radios that we used to carry in our pockets, all that stuff. It's given us a fearlessness to just be willing to try things. And we go through this, like you have a hypothesis and then you do a test and then you evaluate if it like worked or didn't. And if it didn't work, you try to figure out why, and then you update your hypothesis. It's almost like the scientific method was built into our childhood. So I think it's kind of fun to watch, but I also think it's something that we've lost because we live in a time where everything is at your fingertips. And some people think this is a problem. Like they bemoan, Empty, thank you for the happy birthday. They bemoan that everybody has everything at their fingertips and doesn't get to learn anything by themselves because that teaches critical thinking skills, which it does, which is key to seeing through the bullshit that they're like throwing down our throats right now, right? But I don't think it is a problem that we have everything at our fingertips because I watch Gen X interact with everything at our fingertips and like Tag from Life Done Free. He figured out how to build an entire solar system to power his 4,000 square foot home that he lives with his wife in, which is a decent amount of power to have to figure out. He figured out how to get his own water from redundant systems and be able to switch where the water is coming from anytime he needs because he had information available at his fingertips. And he had the critical thinking mind from a FIFO approach to life. And that's a good thing. So have the information itself is not the problem. The problem is when everything is at our fingertips, some people mistakenly think that the theoretical learning process replaces practical application. So they become more focused on, I have to like read the book and learn the thing or watch the video to learn the thing rather than do the thing to learn the thing. And part of that is programming from our school system. Part of that is culturally reinforced learning because every time you're like, hey, I'm going to try to, trim the hooves of my sheep. If I go to the Sheep 101 group right now and put a picture of a sheep hoof and like some trimmers and like say, am I doing it right? And have it in the position where I'm doing it right. 3 of them are going to tell me I'm wrong. 2 of them are going to tell me I don't have a big enough flock to call myself a sheep farmer. And I should just give up now because how stupid could I possibly be? And the rest of them are going to give me helpful, supportive tips like, hey, did you know you could hold a sheep this way? Or all these other things. And the problem is with an emotional response to those first 5 I talked about, you won't read the other 50 comments saying that you are doing it right or giving you other helpful tips. And what really is great about being a Gen Xer is we were just raised to stop reacting to the trolls because everybody was basically making fun of me all the time, right? So it's like, oh, that hurt my feeling. Okay, so what do you have to say? Like you just don't give it time and you move on to something else. But if you obsess on those 5 critical comments, you miss all of the wealth of information that's available out there. And so it's almost like a trauma response now for some people where they're so worried about taking one wrong step. They have to look at everybody's videos and read all the things and take 4 courses and all of these other things when all of the information is at your fingertips. And we like to say this around here. Sheep don't read books. I have never met one that can read a book. And so when I read the thing in my sheep book, it may or may not prove out that it works for that animal because there is some I mean, that's the frustrating part of medicine, right? It's like, you're sick. This should make you feel better. I found the one person in 400 million that it does not make them feel better. Sucks to be me as a doctor. I think book learning is very helpful and it's worth investing in, and courses are worth investing in. In fact, I am one lesson into Jack Spirko's bioreactor composting course. And that so far for me is all theoretical knowledge. And that theoretical knowledge is going to greatly positively impact the way we are making compost at the Holler Homestead. I am taking it with tactical because we run the homestead together. And if we're going to be doing composting and both participating in composting, we need to be participating in the same composting process, right? So I'm a big fan of book learning, but not separate from practical application. I don't want to just nerd out on fungi and bacteria and all the possibilities on the internet and how it can save the world, and it can, but not make my plants outside that window right over there stronger because I have better compost. The purpose of the course is to be better at composting, is to learn something new. John says, I suffer from analysis paralysis constantly. John, I used to suffer from analysis paralysis. And now what I do, and you're going to laugh, I will go to my living room. I will turn 3 circles. And that is like my physical manifestation of I am thinking about all of these things and my head is spinning. Like I literally spin and then I choose a direction and I go. And when I choose that direction, if I get a few steps in and I'm like, this was a horrible idea, I adjust. I had to do that with my camper. I don't know how to replace a camper roof. And I know that to put this rubberized roof on, I need it to stick to the roof. And they had this, it's not rubberized, it's like a membrane. I had to glue it down. But there was a rubberized roof that I had to scrape off. And I spent like 6 hours scraping the dang thing off. And I'm like, great, I'm an hour away. And then Tactical goes up there and scrapes where I've scraped. And he's getting more off. And I'm like, I'm going to spend 16 hours scraping this roof. And I turned to him and I'm like, why can't I just take the metal off and build a new foundation and glue to that? Like, I feel like that's going to cost me $200 in materials and way less time. And he didn't know. So I talked to somebody else. And they're like, yeah, you can do that. And so then we started peeling the roof off. Like, I didn't know where to start on the roof, but I knew that making it so something you could glue to it was important. So scraping was the first choice. And then when that didn't pan out, I went on to another option. I could have spent 2 more weeks researching the best way to do a camper roof, but then my camper roof wouldn't get done. So it's like this balance you always got to get into. But it didn't hurt me to learn about camper roofs. That's how I chose which roof I was going to put on. That's how I chose not just to paint over that rubberized stuff with more rubberized stuff. Yeah, the Wonder Woman empowerment spin. Exactly. I need Wonder Woman fist cuffs, to stop bullets. Yeah, I loved Wonder Woman as a kid. Totally. Yeah. Food Forest Farm says, just do it and add random error. You might discover a better way. That's the thing. You accidentally come across really interesting things when you screw up. So having information at our fingertips is one of the best opportunities we have. We can take classes. We can find information on the internet. It's getting a little harder to find, and you have to use alternative search engines and all this other stuff. But I grew up through search engines even being a thing. Like, I didn't have the internet before. When the internet came out, I'm like, this is amazing. And then I used like Yahoo search and Alta Vista search and all these other ones. And then Google came along and everybody used Google, and now Google is breaking itself. So now we're on to other tools. That's why I'm not afraid to play with the AI tools. It's like, well, other people are going to use them. I guess I better learn how to use them so I understand how they work, because that's going to impact if I know, if the results are real. And what I've learned is I can now tell when marketing ads are written by ChatGPT, because it uses certain words over and over and over. And I know that because I played around with ChatGPT. I've used ChatGPT to write things, right? Like wouldn't you try it out if you had to write stuff? That's just, it's what you do. So today, in celebration of 8 years, I wanted to look at some of the reasons why Living Free in Tennessee and the Holler Homestead have become what they are today. And as I said, I went back and listened to that first episode, and I'm like, it already was what it was. It just was less tidy around here. And apparently I had an ongoing water leak under my water seepage problem under my house the whole time. So what started as a podcast about my walk towards independence, and I was trying to give a woman's perspective on what that looks like. It was motivated by a friend of mine making a pig water, and she was alone because her husband was off earning money so she could be home raising the cattle and the pigs and all that. And she had to get in the pig water to screw a piece on. And because of her lower center of gravity, she couldn't get out of the pig water. And so she had to rock it from side to side, knock it over to get out, which usually a sign the pigs are going to also push it over. And she's like, some things just work differently for women on the homestead. I'm like, yep. But if we're going to be independent, if we're going to walk towards independence, if we're going to build the life we choose, we have to do it anyway. But there aren't very many women sharing what that looks like for them. Now there's lots of women sharing what that looks like for them. At the time, it was like all these men talking about homesteading. And I'm like, how many women are homesteading really? And then as I got into it, I'm pretty sure more women are running the homesteads part of the homestead than men in general, if I generalize. I could be wrong, but man, there's a lot of women out there homesteading. So I started talking about homesteading on Living Free in Tennessee for a couple of reasons. One, because I'm doing it, right? Like, obviously it's something I can talk about. But the homesteading mindset, which Amy Dingman and I are going to talk about on Wednesday on the Spicy Sisters show, man, the homesteading mindset teaches us to create value with what we have so that we can set a foundation to bring value to others. And we can then tap into the value of others and bring that value back to them, right? So homesteading is not a piece of land. Tag says my wife carries the biggest homesteading role, and she's a badass, Tag. She's a badass. So that mindset piece of homesteading is more important than the chickens you grow, than the corn you harvest, than the compost you make, than any awesome automated pig waterer that you've decided to design. Like, all of those things are super helpful on a homestead. But unless you develop the capacity to look around you and find value and then reap the value from that in a way that is, sustainable, basically, it's something you can repeat, you miss an important part of homesteading. What that means is that you can apply the homestead mindset to not a piece of land. You start being able to apply it to any part of your life. Had I not homesteaded, I don't think Holler Roast would be what it is today, because I wouldn't have ever gotten to that mindset where Holler Roast was what I wanted to do. I wanted to sell coffee, right? And I wanted to roast coffee, and I wanted to taste all these beans and find the best ones and only get the best ones, right? So I don't know that I would have gotten there or realized that my ability to roast coffee beans for myself was something that might benefit other people. And now look at it. It's the primary source of my income. So the second reason that I think homesteading is very important to talk about, and it was 8 years ago, as it is now, we're just closer to the cliff. We're kind of maybe a little over the cliff right now. The threat of our society and the economy and the instability we have here. We are in a time of things not going well. And people always say when the crash happens, and I always say the crash is already happening. You're in the crash. You just don't, it's happening slowly enough that you don't realize it, except for you kind of do. That's why you're afraid at night. That's why you look at these news stories and you're like, no, they're not going to do that, right? You're there. And what happens in those times is when a lot of people will go back to the land, and being able to go back to the land and preserve heritage skills for the last almost, I guess, decade and a half I've been working on this means that when people go back to the land, I can help them ramp up quicker and become more resilient by producing their own food, which is a basic need, while reconnecting with nature. And the more people we have capable of doing that, the fewer people we have with very negative motivator, and that is hunger. If you can't feed yourself or your children, violence follows. That's human. And so everybody that we are able to show how to raise a tiny bird to a bigger bird and make a meal out of it, everybody that we're able to show how to become garlic self-reliant or gather food, from the forest that is edible, like learn how to work with wild edibles. Everybody we give those skills to who's able to do it in a way that every year it regenerates itself is a person who hopefully A, will have some surplus for the people who never develop those skills, and B, they're not a threat. They are independent. And the more independent people we have, the less chicanery can be implemented upon the people. Hungry people will do what you tell them. And the chicanery is real. Like, we see the chicanery, and a lot of people see the chicanery. I have to do something. So, oh, sorry, dog. My dog came in. The chicanery that they're trying to implement on us it's been going on my whole life, right? But when you see it and you're in the system, then you can't. When you see it and you're in the system, then it's hard if you are reliant on the system to break out of it. And so then the less reliant we are on the system, the more we can break out of it. And so that's why homesteading. That's a big why for me. It's not, I mean, it does it for me. And then when I show other people how to do it, it does it for them. And then they show other people how to do it, and it does it for them. And it becomes this wave, right? Joel Salatin calls it the homesteading tsunami. Homesteading's natural offspring is freedom. That's the result of homesteading, is more freedom. Food Forest Farms says, store your protein on the hoof, wing, and fin. Yeah, you don't need refrigeration. Just leave it alive. If you know what to do with the animal, you can process the animal, you can cook the animal, and you have more stability, and the animal makes more animals. And the kinds of animals we raise here eat grass. The biggest problem I run into on those sheep advising groups is they actually feed grain to their sheep. We are grass adjusted. So I will sometimes augment with grain if I feel like it's helpful. Plus they consider it treats, so then they'll do what I say. But they're grass adjusted. And so what I'm doing with a grass adjusted animal is different than somebody who's feeding them sheep creep every day. Homesteading's natural offspring is freedom, like the true kind of freedom you build by no longer giving an F about what you used to think you could not live without. And that's a big thing. Like, I used to not think I could live without, I couldn't live without chocolate or whatever. Well, I could live without chocolate now. I couldn't live without beef. I don't have to live without beef. Whatever. It creates a weakness in you if you think you can't live without something. And so then you have two options: learn how to do it or make it happen no matter what. And then you don't have to live without it. Or figure out what you mean by you can't live without that, because maybe you can. Maybe it's just that you've been programmed you're not supposed to live without it. I look at pictures of the houses that people in Appalachia lived in just 100 years ago. And like whole families in these small places that had no insulation. Like they used newspaper on the wall to keep the cold out. And they heated with wood. And they foraged and they grew and they preserved and they did all these things. And I think there's a lot we can live without and still live. And even be happy. You can even be happy. So, you know, the life I'm living now it just ain't that bad, man. Your health is the biggest gift that you were given, and homesteading supports health if you do it well. And the commercial food system is poison. And that's something we talk about a lot. The commercial food is poison, even though we were raised on Kool-Aid and Cheez-Its, and Doritos, and all that crap. And it was delicious, and ding dongs and Twinkies. But that stuff has not gotten healthier as we've gotten older. And it's very convenient, and it supports the just-in-time system, and people see a big conspiracy behind it. I don't see that. I see the natural outcome of a system whose motivation is to fulfill a just-in-time fulfillment system, and that includes political action and then kickbacks on lobbies. It's just like, it's what's going to happen. And I don't think it's about keeping us fat and stupid. I think it does keep us fat and stupid, though. And that's not great. So I'm less of a conspiracy theorist on that one than other people, but I could be wrong. I'm open to being wrong too. Back to the critical thinking. Homesteading heals your spirit. I've seen so many people who come into this life and they're broken, and it heals your spirit because you have a connection to the seasons and to the sun and to the sunlight and to the bacteria around you in the soil. And you slow down. One of the best posts I saw this year was a friend of mine from my political action years, like when I worked in public policy. And I was in the public policy side. He was running candidates. So he was like on the dirtier part of politics than I was. I was on the less dirty side of politics. It's still dirty AF, by the way. He bought land in Tennessee and is creating this like cool, like out in the country veterans retreat. He's lived there for about, 4 months. And he drove to town and he posted, "Town is loud and it's stressful and there's traffic." And he goes on this whole thing. I had no idea. And I'm like, yeah, because when you get back to the land, when you get onto a homestead, you start healing, you start connecting with nature, and then you realize how high population centers are not natural. They're the opposite of nature, and you become stressed and you're like, I had no idea I was filtering all of this stuff out all of that time. So that's why homesteading is such a big focus, and has been for Living Free in Tennessee for 8 years. As I think back on the last 8 years, really, of this podcast, I started out by wanting to share my like personal planner on that first episode. And that was the beginnings of the My Three Things book, right? Which I just finished the last chapter in Texas. The most surprising thing that happened to this community is that we've become one. We've become a community that grows, and we share as we share the episodes, and as we help one another and get together at events and get shit done and do all of those things. I didn't expect all of these people to become like family to me, and they did. I met people who became like family to me. And the wider community has just grown more and more and more each year. And the attitude that people take to be in the Living Free in Tennessee community is, how can I help you? And somebody will be like, hey, I need to brainstorm this business idea. And then we have the analysis paralysis thing somebody was talking about in the comments. And then somebody's like, hey, get out of your analysis paralysis. Stop thinking so hard and start. Right? I just saw somebody finally get over their analysis paralysis who's been in it the whole 8 years of my podcast. You know who you are. If you think I'm talking about you, I probably am, and you know me well. And they're starting to do more. And they're like, man, it's like watching somebody it's like watching a rose just open up and bloom. It's really cool to see. So that was the unexpected, no intention, it just happened part of the podcast that I love. And 8 years ago, I didn't think we would become a counter economy and an underground network. And every time somebody reaches out to me and says, we need to set up the counter economy, we don't have a counter economy, we need a better network, I'm like, have you looked around? We're already there. We already exist as a counter economy. We buy each other's stuff. We trade for stuff. We help each other source things when things are hard to source in different regions. We help people out of abusive relationships, and nobody knows we do that, but we do that, right? So we do a lot of things. The underground network happens. Somebody's out of a job, people try to talk to them, or at least get them like started volunteering somewhere so they're out in public doing something every day, not just sitting at home saying I don't have a job. Because there's only so many applications you can put in like every single day. There's a certain point where you're like, I just gotta go do something else. That part was destined to happen, and I truly believe that the counter economy existed well before we ever came to be. I think it's been there the whole time. And when we nerd out on this concept of having a counter economy and how we're going to use what money and all of this other stuff, and we get like bogged down in the details of it, we stop doing the thing that's important, and that's just as free people interacting with each other economically, interacting with each other in communications, interacting each other by helping each other, interacting with each other by trading, interacting with each other by falling in love, and whatever all that follows. Like, that's it. It already exists. It always existed. And the more tyrannical our current government gets, the more the counter economy and the underground network strengthens. It just becomes more defined, and it's a natural process. And if somebody comes up with a great platform that we can use to do that, great. I kind of like Nostr right now, to be honest, but that's to be transparent, not honest. I wasn't dishonest. To be transparent, I like Nostr. So if what you want to build is like this whole new thing, look at Nostr first and see, does that fulfill the purpose of what you're doing? Because I will admit, it would be really nice if Food Forest Farms, who also sells coffee, if I wanted to get coffee from Food Forest Farm and he didn't want to trade Hollow Roast coffee for Food Forest Farm coffee, and I didn't have anything else he wanted, but Jimmy had a knife that he makes that Food Forest Farm wants, it'd be nice if there was a way to make that happen without me going, okay, Jimmy, I'll trade you coffee for the knife. Knife goes to Food Forest Farm. Food Forest Farm sends coffee to me, right? That's why we have money, so we don't have to do that. So, yeah, sometimes I just do it with money. I just spend my dollars with people who are in our network when I can. I will never buy soap at the store again. There's too many good soap makers in our network. And, soap is important. It's sanitary. It makes you not smell bad. Some of it's exfoliating. That one smells really good. I keep it by my desk so I can smell it. Yeah, it wasn't even in my tip of my mind to think about a counter economy then. I knew what the word meant. And we were already doing it. And then we did it more as we got to know each other. 8 years ago, I was lucky if one person came to a cheese class here or a canning class here or a chicken processing day. And now we feel think about how big Self-Reliance Festival is. selfreliancefestival.com. Get your tickets before the price goes up, right? More than 500 people were there last fall. I'm pushing for 1,000 this time. I think 1,000 is a good number for that venue. We fill venues. I had 16 people listening to episode 2. We fill venues with people. I sell out my spring workshop every year. I keep finding more and more people who want to opt out of the current normal and create a better life for themselves and their families. And they're sick of being told what to do. And they're sick of asking permission. And they know deep down inside they shouldn't have to. And when they meet other people who don't, they're like, oh man, I could just not ask permission and go build my soap selling empire. Bring it. Hogs, I'll see you there in October. Awesome. 8 years ago, I had no idea I would talk into a microphone for 8 years. And I've only done it because of y'all. I almost didn't make it. Way back at the beginning, I got to episode 7. And there was stuff going on in my family. There's stuff going on in my family now, so expect some sporadic schedules, by the way. There was stuff going on with my family, and I think for 3 months I didn't do a podcast episode. And one of y'all said, hey, when are you doing your next episode? And I did episode 8. Episode 8 is why Janet Zabo is here. Episode 8 is why Tactical lives at my house, right? Episode 8 was when I really was like, okay, I'm going to go forward. And every time I've ever felt discouraged, y'all have been like, hey, we want more, or we want to hear this topic, or I want to know more about this thing, or can you get this person on? Or you do something amazing and I just have to tell that story. So thank you for supporting me for the last 8 years and for interacting with me and putting comments in the live streams now that we're live. That's what has kept this podcast going. So why do I always talk about community? I'm like known as the person who knows how to build community. And people ask me, how do you build community? And I'm like, well, you show up. That's literally it. You show up. And it's easy to say. And they're like, but I'm all alone in whatever part of the world. I'm like, who else in this room is from that part of the world? And usually there's somebody there. I think we actually found somebody who wasn't, like there wasn't somebody for the first time at the last SRF. I was like, wow, you're a unicorn. And they just laughed. I'm like, well, next best thing, like one state over. But there's other people. There are always other people around you. I went to the farmer's market on Saturday. And last year I was like, man, this farmer's market's going to stop. And what has happened is they've stopped charging for booths. And now there's a bunch of people there, mostly baked goods and stuff I don't use, but a couple of vegetable farmers. And I walk over and I'm like, dude selling plants. I'm like, is that elderberry? He's like, yes. And I look and he's got yarrow and all these other medicinals. And he's like, these are all medicinal plants. And he told me the whole story about how he was a teacher in Illinois when COVID happened and he got super interested in herbal remedies. And he's like, there's like this plant medicine, like super excited about plant medicine. And I bought a mugwort from him that I hope Tactical has put in the ground somewhere. And he ended up talking to me for 45 minutes. And I met somebody who lives in the small town near where I live who is like-minded from the standpoint of we need to be more resilient. We need to, do these things. And his passion are the herbal remedies. And I think that's awesome. But that's just one more step towards community, right? Homesteaders were never alone originally when homesteading. Like they would get their plot and sure, you're trying to live off the land, but you ended up in groups of people, right? And if somebody needed help or somebody was having a difficult birth, somebody went over and helped if they could. Like as humans, we're not alone. So you don't go into homesteading thinking, hey, I'm going to be alone and never see anybody. You go into homesteading saying, how can I help? The second reason community is important is it's very easy to attack one person, especially if you are the FUDs, right? The FDA, the USDA, all the DAs, the DOEs. It's very hard to attack many. And I love the story of John Moody's grocery cooperative where they were doing raw milk. And I think it was the USDA shut them down and said they couldn't. Like note on the door, you do this and die. And they did it on Independence Day weekend. And John Moody's a smart dude. And he reached out to all the people in his cooperative. And there were a lot, many of them doctors and all sorts of different things. He's like, hey, this is a membership association. You have herd shares. You can do whatever you want, sort of thing. Do me a favor, call your representative, say, I'm sorry to disturb you on this Independence Day week, but I wanted you to be aware of that the Department of Health has shut us down for these reasons and what this needs to not happen, basically. And he figured out by addresses which representatives people should call. And the Department of Health hasn't messed with him since. And he did that because he had people around him, true community. So you don't want to go it alone, actually. And we need to be there for each other when stuff goes wrong. We all need to learn to keep building. And we can't do that without one another. And even I've been homesteading for 17 years. That doesn't mean I know everything. It just means I know some things. And other people know some things. And we have to overlap. Like I took Joel Salatin's chicken processing class last fall. And I was like, wow, I teach this and I'm going to teach it a little differently now. It's good to take those classes, man. It's amazing. And I think I've talked about like my 3 areas of focus to y'all, which come out in that first podcast under different words. I've boiled it down to, 8 years later, they're down to one word: health, community, and wealth. And by wealth, I don't just mean monetary wealth. I just mean wealth, like relationship wealth, the different forms of capital, right? 8 years. I've been talking to this mic that has no face for 8 years. And the coffee would not exist without it. So why did I do coffee? I think the biggest surprise I had when listening to that old episode was that I actually talked about coffee. I didn't realize I'd been talking about coffee since episode 1. In 2016, I sort of did this like coffee roasting side hustle thing. I'd earn a couple $100s a month. I'd go down to the farmer's market, sell my coffee for too cheap, because that's the mistake homesteaders make. And that Nicole didn't think she'd ever find the $15,000 to $20,000 needed to get a commercial roaster. That Nicole in 2016 still thought that changing policy in our country with the current political structure as it is and the power structures as they are from the inside would work to fix the problem, and it won't. That Nicole had no clue that she would earn the bulk of her income just 8 years later by selling coffee through hollerroast.com through the mail all over the country. I hadn't even conceived that was possible. Like, my idea of what a coffee business looked like was that I was selling on grocery store shelves, at farmers markets, and I don't do any of that. None of it. All my coffee is roasted to order, which is exactly how I want to do it. I don't have to live in a city with a high population to do that and have a storefront where I make people coffee drinks. It's perfect. That Nicole already loved coffee, though, which is why she talked about it in her first episode. She just didn't know how to tap into that love. And when people are like, I don't know how to tap into the things I love, the answer is, well, let's brainstorm ways that you can try, and then learn, and then really assess what you like or don't like about that, right? That Nicole did take a step, though. She started the podcast. She set her vision and her purpose and her areas of focus, and she took a step every day. And Holler Roast went from that thing that was sometimes at the farmer's market to what it is today, one step at a time. It didn't happen overnight. It went one. By the time I was on Spirko's show doing that first Kickstarter, I was already starting to mail coffee to people, and I was roasting it a half a pound at a time. So a 2-pound order was like a pretty big deal to me. So some of you may wonder why I sort of get this glazed over look when you talk to me about your next idea that you're excited about, only to tell me that you this is why you haven't started, or this is why you can't go for it. That's why. In those moments, I'm madly trying to decide who you are and how to best give you a small push. Or if you're one of the people who needs a big punch, because there are 2 different kinds of people. Some people love to be tied to the back of a truck riding a skateboard and, woo, take me along for the ride, I'll do it, right? And those are the people that you kind of need to yell at when they're like, well, I'm not starting because I'm an idiot. And other people need me to ask a question and back off while they internalize it, so they will get over whatever barrier they have to just starting. And if I hurt their feelings in that moment, they're going to back away from their dream that it was all they could do to talk to me about, and they almost feel guilty for even having a dream, right? Those people require a little bit gentler input. It's like they're sorry to love whatever it is they're telling me they love. I'm like, what? Who did this to you? That's so sad. You should be able to love whatever you want. I don't care if it's rappelling off mountains and taking people on rappelling tours. That's a perfectly valid thing to do with your life, if that's what you love. It's not what I want to do, because I'm a little hazy on heights, but it might be what you love to do. It's like, it's not okay to yearn for a slower, simpler way of life in the homestead. Like when we're homesteaders, we're apologetic. Oh, I homestead. No, you can yearn for whatever you want. It's not okay to love knitting or soap making or bone broth or building things with your hands and so many other things. You love what you love. And the really sad thing is that we got programmed to think that loving something that's like a physical activity like farming or carpentry or the gajillion other non-intellectual pursuits is somehow less than intellectual pursuits. That's the programming that's most important to break. If you are an intellectual pursuit person, fine, do it. Do it well. But the biggest beast to overcome is the programming that the thing you love, the misplaced belief that a non-intellectual job is less, because it isn't. If you're going to spend most of your time building a future based on something you hate, because it's an intellectual and worthy pursuit, you're going to spend most of your life miserable. You miss your chance to do something you like your whole life. You miss the chance for your job not to feel like a job. I literally work my ass off and I feel like I'm retired because I just do what I like to do. Sometimes I do too much of what I like to do and I get sick. But, someone once asked me early on with Hollow Roast, like it was about 2017 when I was doing that first Kickstarter, which was successful. They said, would you really be happy roasting coffee for people for the rest of your life? And it was sort of that look on the face like, and I'm like, well, yeah. They were insinuating that being a coffee roaster is not worthy of my smarts. But I love it. So why coffee? Because I love coffee. That's it. I like finding the beans. I like learning about the farms. I like roasting them. I like tasting them. I don't love packing them. I don't love shipping them. That's why I pay a co-packer to make the K-Cups that we just launched. My ultimate goal is that will be a drop ship item, right? Because now that I know I love coffee, I can figure out which parts of coffee I love, and I can tailor what I'm doing more to the stuff I love. And then I can do what I love every single day. But the idea that roasting coffee is somehow not worthy as a valid pursuit is absurd. It's totally absurd. And the day you realize that your passion is worthy of your time, no matter what anybody else thinks, is the day that you have just chosen freedom. That's the day you became truly free. You chose freedom over programming. So those are all my thoughts on this eighth year celebration. Here's to 8 years with my herbal tea. Almost 1,000 episodes later, you're still listening to me. Thanks for that, guys. Thanks for all your support. But here's to what comes next, because here's to you doing all those things too, and to me spilling tea on my keyboard. That's happened before. That's why I know you just shake it upside down, and I have backup keyboards so that this one can dry out. Anyway, here's to all of that. Here's to sharing your stories with me. I want to know what you're doing when you do well. But it's been an interesting 8 years. And I can't wait to see what happens next. With that, if you like the show and want to support the work I'm doing here, you can do it in 2 ways. 1, get your coffee at Hollow Roast. 2, consider becoming a member. Our member webinar in June is going to be Joel Salatin, just FYI. We'll be releasing more about that over this week. That's all over at livingfreeintennessee.com. With that, guys, go out. Make it a great week.